Disclaimer asterisk: this story contains themes of crime, psychological suspense, and the unsettling nature of unsolved mysteries. Listener discretion is advised. The air in Willow Creek that Tuesday morning in early October was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp leaves. It was the kind of morning that promised a perfect autumn day, the kind where the maple trees along Main Street glowed like embers. But by noon, that crispness had turned to an icy dread that settled deep in the bones of every man, woman, and child in our quiet New England town. That's when Sarah Jenkins, out for her usual hike on the old Willow Trail, stumbled upon something that would forever shatter the peace of Willow Creek: Eleanor Vance's car. It wasn't the car itself that sent shivers down Sarah's spine. Eleanor's sensible silver sedan was a familiar sight, known to be parked outside the town library almost every day. It was where it was parked and how. The car sat perfectly aligned at the very edge of the overgrown trailhead parking lot, almost as if placed there with meticulous care. No signs of struggle, no broken glass, no frantic skid marks on the gravel. Just Eleanor's car, pristine and still, as if waiting for its owner to return from a casual stroll. But Eleanor Vance never went for casual strolls on the Willow Trail. Not alone. And most unsettling of all, her favorite hand-knitted lavender scarf, the one she wore every day, was folded with unnerving precision on the passenger seat. Not tossed, not dropped, but folded. It was the unnatural order of it all that screamed louder than any chaos. Eleanor Vance wasn't just a librarian in Willow Creek. She was the town's quiet anchor. She knew everyone, remembered every birthday, and had a knack for finding the exact right book for your mood, even if you didn't know what you were looking for yourself. She was a beacon of gentle wisdom, a woman who baked cookies for every town meeting and organized the annual summer reading program with the zeal of a seasoned general. Her disappearance wasn't just a local tragedy. It felt like a limb had been torn from the very body of Willow Creek. The initial investigation was a whirlwind of flashing lights, uniform hurried movements, and hushed conversations. Chief Daniel Hayes, a man whose face was usually etched with the easygoing calm of small-town life, now wore a grim mask of determination. Every local, from the teenagers who'd grown up with Eleanor's stories to the elderly residents she'd served for decades, volunteered to help. Search parties scoured the dense woods around the trail, their calls echoing through the autumn trees, each unanswered shout a fresh stab of fear. Days bled into nights, then weeks, and still Eleanor was gone. Then, just as hope began to fray, the police made an arrest. Marcus Thorne. The name sent a ripple of bewildered murmurs through Willow Creek. Marcus was a drifter, a quiet, gaunt man who had been passing through town for a few months, doing odd jobs, often seen reading tattered paperbacks in the town park. He was an outsider, undeniably, but violent? Seemed unthinkable. Yet, the evidence against him mounted swiftly. A cheap, distinctive watch, identified as belonging to Marcus, was found tangled in a bush near Eleanor's car. A witness, Martha Henderson, swore she'd seen Marcus arguing heatedly with Eleanor outside the library just 2 days before she vanished, though no one else could corroborate the argument, only that Marcus had been present. His transient lifestyle, his lack of an alibi, and a past record of minor offenses in other states painted a picture the prosecution was all too eager to present. The town, desperate for answers, for closure, for a return to the normalcy Eleanor's absence had stolen, latched onto the narrative. Marcus Thorne, the outsider, the troubled soul, had taken Eleanor Vance. It was tragic, it was senseless, but it was an explanation. And with an explanation came a degree of peace, however fragile. The trial was swift, the verdict inevitable. Marcus Thorne was found guilty and sent to prison. Justice, everyone whispered, had been served. Willow Creek took a collective, shaky breath and began the slow, painful process of healing. But for some, the wound never quite closed. For me, Arthur Miller, a retired investigative journalist who had moved to Willow Creek seeking a quieter life, the case of Eleanor Vance was a persistent, low thrum beneath the surface of my new tranquility. I had known Eleanor not intimately, but enough to respect her sharp mind and unwavering kindness. I had even interviewed Marcus Thorne once, years ago, for a piece about transient communities and the hidden struggles within them. He was a man burdened by life, yes, but not a monster. Something about the neatness of Eleanor's car, the speed of Marcus's arrest, and his almost eerily passive acceptance of his fate had always nagged at me. It felt too neat, too convenient, like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong spot. I followed the trial closely, rereading every newspaper clipping, every police statement, every piece of evidence presented. Most people saw a clear-cut case, a tragic but resolved mystery. I saw gaps, inconsistencies, shadows where there should have been light. The more I delved, the more I felt a growing unease, a conviction that the real story had been overlooked, perhaps even intentionally obscured. The detail that snagged my attention, the one that refused to be dismissed, was so small, so seemingly insignificant, that it barely warranted a mention in the official police report. It was buried deep within the forensic notes on Eleanor's car, dismissed as irrelevant, a quirk. Her car keys. They weren't in her purse, which was found locked inside the car. They weren't on the ground, dropped during a struggle. They weren't even in the ignition. The keys to Eleanor Vance's silver sedan were found tucked neatly under the driver's seat mat. Think about that for a moment. If Eleanor had been abducted, if she had been forced from her car, or if it had been stolen and then abandoned, why would the keys be meticulously hidden inside the vehicle? It made no sense. A car thief wouldn't hide the keys after abandoning a car. They'd toss them or take them. An abductor wouldn't bother. Their focus would be on Eleanor, not securing her vehicle. And Eleanor herself, if she had simply walked away, would have taken her keys with her, or left them in the ignition so the car could be easily moved. No, the placement of those keys, hidden almost deliberately, spoke of a careful, calculated act. It suggested an intention entirely at odds with the frantic, violent scenario painted by the prosecution. It suggested someone wanted the car to appear abandoned, but also wanted to ensure the keys remained with the car, perhaps to be found later, perhaps as a signal. It was a detail hidden in plain sight, a tiny, almost invisible thread that, once pulled, threatened to unravel the entire tapestry of what Willow Creek believed to be true. And I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the very first step on a dark path, leading to the real truth of what happened to Eleanor Vance. My fingers trembled as I held the locket, its cold metal a stark contrast to the sudden heat in my chest. It felt impossibly heavy, a small, unassuming key to a decade of silence. The clasp was stiff, corroded by years beneath the earth, but with a determined twist and a soft click it sprang open. Inside, nestled in the tarnished silver, were two tiny, faded photographs. One was unmistakably Eleanor younger, perhaps 15 or 16, her familiar bright smile a ghost of the girl I remembered. But it was the other photograph, tucked into the opposite side, that stole my breath and sent a jolt of icy dread through me. It was a man, older, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, with kind eyes and a neatly trimmed beard, a smile playing on his lips. He wasn't smiling at Eleanor in the adjacent photo, but rather, his gaze seemed to be directed at the locket itself, as if he knew it would one day be opened. And I knew him. Everyone in Willow Creek knew him. It was Arthur Peterson. Arthur Peterson wasn't just anyone in Willow Creek. He was a pillar of the community, a respected history teacher at Willow Creek High for over 30 years. He taught me, he taught Eleanor, he taught half the town. He was known for his gentle demeanor, his passion for local history, and his quiet life with his wife, Martha. He was the kind of man you trust with your deepest secrets, the kind of man who always had a comforting word, a wise piece of advice. He was utterly, completely beyond reproach. And yet, here he was in Eleanor Vance's secret locket. My mind raced trying to make sense of it. Why would Eleanor have a picture of Mr. Peterson in a locket she wore constantly? A locket that clearly meant something deeply personal to her. Was it a student-teacher admiration? A gift? No, the intimacy of a locket, the privacy it implied, suggested something far deeper than mere respect. And Eleanor at 16 was fiercely private, especially about her affections. The official narrative of Eleanor's disappearance was simple: a troubled teenager, a possible runaway, or a tragic accident. No foul play was ever definitively proven. The police, led by Chief Daniel Miller, had conducted a thorough search, interviewed everyone remotely connected to her, and ultimately closed the case with an inconclusive verdict that leaned heavily towards her having simply vanished. They'd never found her body, never found a solid lead. The town, heartbroken, eventually moved on, accepting the ambiguity as a form of closure. But this locket, this photograph, shattered that fragile peace. It wasn't a clue to a runaway. It was a thread to a hidden relationship, a secret life Eleanor might have been living. And suddenly, the story of the innocent, slightly rebellious girl felt incomplete, almost fabricated. I looked down at the locket again, my thumb tracing the outline of Mr. Peterson's face. The implications were staggering. If Eleanor had a secret relationship with a married, respected teacher, it would have been scandalous. It would have turned Willow Creek upside down. And if that relationship had anything to do with her disappearance, then the entire investigation, the entire town's understanding, was built on a lie. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, a feeling far more unsettling than the initial excitement of finding the locket. This wasn't just about finding Eleanor. This was about uncovering something rotten at the heart of Willow Creek, something someone had gone to great lengths to bury. My first impulse was to go to Chief Miller. He was still the chief, albeit older, wearier. He was the one who had promised Eleanor's parents he would never give up, but a part of me hesitated. Chief Miller had been the lead investigator 10 years ago. If this locket pointed to a cover-up, or even just a massive oversight, how would he react? Would he be open to reopening a case that had effectively ended his career's defining mystery? Or would he see it as a challenge to his past work, an accusation? I remembered the look in his eyes when he talked about the Vance case. A deep regret, a quiet frustration. He was a good man, but he was also a man of habit, of procedure. This locket screamed unconventional. No, I decided. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to understand what this photograph truly meant before I brought it to anyone. My own memory, my own understanding of Eleanor, felt suddenly unreliable. How much did I really know about my friend? How much did any of us? I carefully tucked the locket into a small, velvet pouch I kept in my desk drawer, a temporary sanctuary for secrets. The afternoon sun, once warm and inviting, now seemed to cast long, suspicious shadows across my living room. Every creak of the old house, every rustle of leaves outside, seemed amplified, imbued with a new, unsettling significance. I tried to recall every interaction Eleanor had ever had with Mr. Peterson. In history class, of course. He was a fair teacher, a little quiet but always engaging. He'd make history come alive with anecdotes about the town's founders, always encouraging students to look beyond the surface, to question narratives. The irony was not lost on me. Did they ever spend time together outside of class? Not that I remembered. Eleanor was part of our tight-knit group. Me, Sarah Jenkins, David Chun, and Michael O'Connell. We were inseparable. We knew each other's crushes, our petty dramas, our deepest fears. Or so I thought. Suddenly, a memory flickered, faint and almost forgotten, like a distant whisper. It was the summer before Eleanor disappeared. The summer she turned 16. We were all working part-time jobs, saving up for college, trying to enjoy our last few years of carefree youth. Eleanor had taken a job at the Willow Creek Historical Society, helping Mrs. Henderson organize old records and exhibits. It was a quiet job, one she said she enjoyed because it gave her time to think. And who was a prominent figure, a volunteer, and often seen at the Historical Society meetings and events? Arthur Peterson, the town historian. He practically lived there, advising Mrs. Henderson, giving lectures, immersed in the town's past. My breath hitched. The Historical Society. It wasn't just a place of quiet contemplation for Eleanor. It was a place where she would have, inevitably, spent significant time alone with Mr. Peterson. This wasn't some fleeting moment in a school hallway. This was sustained, unsupervised interaction, away from the prying eyes of the high school, away from her friends. A new wave of unease washed over me. Why had I never connected those dots before? Why had no one? Because it was Mr. Peterson. Because he was harmless, respectable, a pillar. It was a classic case of not seeing what was right in front of you because your mind refused to entertain the possibility. I pushed away from my desk, the silence of the room suddenly oppressive. I needed to revisit the Historical Society, not as a nostalgic trip but as an investigator. I needed to look at it with fresh eyes, eyes that now saw Arthur Peterson not just as a teacher, but as a potential secret. I pulled out my old yearbook from that year, the one with Eleanor's vibrant smile on page 47. I flipped through the pages, past the awkward photos and hopeful messages, until I found the faculty section. There he was, Arthur Peterson, his photo slightly blurry, his smile just as I remembered it. Below it, his description: history teacher, head of Willow Creek Historical Society, advisor for Junior Honors Program, head of Willow Creek Historical Society. Of course, it was so obvious now. He wasn't just a volunteer. He was the authority. He would have been Eleanor's direct supervisor, her mentor. The lines between professional and personal could easily blur in such an intimate, quiet setting, especially with someone as impressionable and idealistic as Eleanor. My gaze lingered on his photo, then flickered back to Eleanor's. A knot tightened in my stomach. The innocent, tragic runaway story was crumbling piece by piece, revealing something far more complex, far more sinister. And the worst part? This potential secret, this potentially dangerous connection, had been staring Willow Creek in the face for 10 years, hidden in plain sight, disguised as everyday respectability. I knew what I had to do next. I had to go back to the source, the Willow Creek Historical Society. It was time to unearth the history that Mr. Peterson, the town historian, might have deliberately kept buried. And I had a chilling premonition that the dust and forgotten archives wouldn't be the only things I'd find. The Willow Creek Historical Society was housed in an old Victorian mansion, its once grand facade now faded and peeling, like a forgotten portrait. Ivy clung to the brickwork, attempting to reclaim the history within, while a single flickering gas lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the porch. The air itself felt heavy, thick with the scent of aged paper, dust, and something else. Something stagnant, like secrets left too long in the dark. A brass plaque, tarnished with time, simply read, EST 1888. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the creak of my shoes on the polished wooden floorboards. The main hall was a labyrinth of display cases filled with sepia-toned photographs, antique farming tools, and yellowed documents detailing the town's founding families. It felt less like a museum and more like a mausoleum of forgotten lives. "Can I help you?" A voice, dry and brittle as old parchment, cut through the quiet. Mr. Peterson emerged from behind a towering shelf of leather-bound ledgers. He was a man carved from the very essence of the building, thin, stooped, with spectacles perched on the end of a long, narrow nose, and eyes that seemed to have seen too much history, or perhaps too little. His tweed jacket, though meticulously cared for, bore the unmistakable sheen of age. "Mr. Peterson? I'm here about the missing teenagers Sarah Jenkins, Mark Beaumont, Emily Vance, and David Sterling, and the other disappearances before them." I tried to keep my voice steady, but the weight of the place pressed down on me. He adjusted his spectacles, his gaze sharp and dismissive. "Ah yes, the current unpleasantness. Tragedy, certainly. But I assure you, young man, the Historical Society deals with the past, not current police investigations. Our archives are for scholarly research, not amateur detective work." "I understand that, sir. But I believe there might be a connection between these recent disappearances and some historical events in Willow Creek. Perhaps a pattern, a location, something that might have been overlooked." I pressed on, trying to convey a sense of genuine inquiry, not just wild speculation. Detective Miller suggested I look into the town's history for any unusual occurrences, especially around the old quarry or the surrounding woods. The mention of Detective Miller seemed to stiffen his already rigid posture. A flicker of something, annoyance, recognition, crossed his face, quickly masked. Detective Miller is a busy man, I'm sure, and while I respect his efforts, he's mistaken. Willow Creek has always been a peaceful, if somewhat unremarkable, community. There are no unusual occurrences beyond the occasional lost hiker or, tragically, a few runaway youths. Nothing that would connect to this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing the entire town, and perhaps the very concept of its dark underbelly. Are there any records of other disappearances from, say, the early 1900s or even earlier? Perhaps specific areas of the town that were considered dangerous or unlucky? I tried a different tack. Peterson sighed, a theatrical exhalation that seemed designed to convey my intrusion. "Our records are extensive, yes, but they are also meticulously cataloged and cross-referenced. If there were anything of relevance to your theory, it would have been noted. We have no records of any serial disappearances or historical mysteries of the kind you're implying. Just the mundane ebb and flow of small-town life." He started to turn, clearly intending to dismiss me, but I wasn't finished. "What about the old quarry? I heard it was once a significant site. Any old maps, geological surveys, or even local folklore related to it?" He paused, a shadow falling over his face. "The quarry is just an old quarry. It was active for a time, then abandoned. Dangerous, yes, but only to the careless. No grand mysteries there. We have a few old mining permits, perhaps some photographs of the operation, nothing more. They're in the Industrial Archives, Section C, Shelf 8. But I assure you it's a waste of your time." His tone was now laced with an edge of warning, almost a command to desist. Despite his words, his hesitation had given me a small victory. He had given me a direction, however reluctantly. "I'd appreciate it if I could access those records, Mr. Peterson, just to be thorough." He regarded me with a long, assessing stare. "Very well. But you'll sign in naturally, and you'll adhere to our strict research protocols. No photography, no ink pens, and absolutely no disturbing the existing order. I will be in my office if you require assistance, though I doubt you will find any." He pointed to a dusty guestbook on a small antique desk, then gestured vaguely towards a dimly lit corridor leading deeper into the building. "Industrial archives are down that hall, second door on the left. Good luck." His voice was dripping with sarcasm. I signed my name, the pen scratching loudly in the oppressive quiet, and walked towards the corridor. The air grew colder as I ventured further, the smell of dust more potent. The second door on the left led into a cavernous room, even larger and more cluttered than the main hall. Floor-to-ceiling shelves groaned under the weight of countless boxes, rolls of blueprints, and forgotten machinery parts. A single bare bulb hung precariously overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving light on everything. Finding Section C, Shelf 8 was a challenge in itself. The labeling was haphazard, fading, and often obscured by other items. It took me nearly an hour, my hands growing grimy with dust, before I finally located a stack of large, flat boxes labeled Willow Creek Quarry, 1890 to 1920. I carefully pulled out the top box and carried it to a sturdy, if wobbly, wooden table in the center of the room. Inside, brittle sheets of paper, some crumbling at the edges, lay preserved. There were faded blueprints of the quarry's layout, geological surveys detailing rock formations, and even some handwritten letters from the quarry owners discussing production quotas and labor issues. It was exactly as Peterson described: mundane. I methodically went through each document, my eyes scanning for anything out of place. A name, a date, a peculiar marking on a map. Nothing. Just the industrial history of a long-defunct enterprise. My initial hope began to wane. Was Peterson right? Was I chasing ghosts where there were none? Then, tucked beneath a stack of payroll receipts, I found it. It wasn't a blueprint or a letter or a geological survey. It was a crude, hand-drawn map. It was much smaller than the official documents, drawn on what looked like a piece of thick, yellowed butcher paper. The lines were unsteady, almost childlike, but the key features of the quarry were unmistakable. The main pit, the access roads, the old processing plant. What caught my eye, though, was a series of additional markings. A small, roughly drawn cross near the deepest part of the quarry, labeled simply the Deep Eye. Next to it, a series of faint, almost invisible lines radiated outwards, forming a rough circle. And then, most curiously, a small, almost imperceptible symbol, a stylized, inverted triangle with a dot in its center, repeated several times along these radiating lines. It looked like nothing I had ever seen on a standard map. This wasn't an official document. It was too personal, too crude, felt like a secret. I carefully unfolded it further, revealing a small handwritten note scrawled in faded ink at the bottom. The handwriting was looping and archaic, difficult to decipher, but I made out a few words. "Beware the eye where the old ones sleep, the veil thins." The rest was illegible, a jumble of faded ink and cryptic symbols that seemed to mimic the inverted triangle. My heart began to pound with a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Peterson had said there were no mysteries, only mundane records. Yet here, hidden in plain sight, was something profoundly not mundane. The Deep Eye, where the old ones sleep. The veil thins. This wasn't about mining permits. It was about something ancient, something sinister. I compared the hand-drawn map to one of the official blueprints of the quarry. The cross marked the Deep Eye corresponded to a section of the quarry that was exceptionally deep, almost an abyss, marked on the official map as unstable rock formation, restricted access. But there was no mention of any veil or old ones. As I studied the crude map, a sudden chill permeated the already cold room. The air seemed to thicken, and I had the distinct sensation of being watched. I glanced up, my eyes sweeping across the towering shelves, the dusty boxes, the shadows clinging to the corners of the room. Nothing, just the oppressive silence. But the feeling persisted. It was as if the very walls of the historical society had ears, and the secrets I was unearthing were not meant to be disturbed. I carefully folded the map, intending to take a mental photograph of its most crucial details, knowing I couldn't remove it without Peterson's knowledge, and likely his severe disapproval. Just as I tucked it back into its hiding place, I heard footsteps approaching from the corridor. Heavy, deliberate steps. My breath hitched. Was it Peterson? Had he been watching me? Had he known exactly what I would find? The footsteps stopped just outside the door. I froze, my hand still resting on the box. The silence stretched, taut and agonizing. Then a sharp rap on the door frame. "Finding everything you need, young man?" Peterson's voice, devoid of its earlier sarcasm, was now unnervingly flat. He stood framed in the doorway, his silhouette stark against the dim light of the corridor. His eyes, though obscured by his spectacles, seemed to bore into me, reading my every thought. "Yes, Mr. Peterson. Just a lot of old paperwork." I lied, trying to sound nonchalant, my pulse still racing. I pulled out a random, innocuous-looking permit and held it up. "Very thorough records." He took a step into the room, his gaze sweeping over the table, lingering for a moment on the box I had just put away. "Indeed, our historical records are quite comprehensive. But as I said, nothing of interest to your particular inquiry, I trust." His emphasis on interest was chilling. It wasn't a question, it was a veiled threat. He knew I had found something. Or perhaps he expected me to find something and was now assessing my reaction. The air crackled with unspoken tension. "No, sir. Just confirming the quarry's operational history." I met his gaze, trying to project an air of calm I certainly didn't feel. My mind raced, trying to process the map, the cryptic message, and Peterson's sudden watchful presence. He remained silent for a long moment, his eyes unblinking, before finally nodding slowly. "Good. Then I trust you'll be finished soon. We close in 15 minutes. And please ensure everything is returned precisely as you found it." With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps receding down the corridor, leaving me alone once more in the oppressive silence. But I wasn't truly alone. The hand-drawn map, with its chilling message of the deep eye, and where the old ones sleep, was burned into my memory. And I now knew with terrifying certainty that Mr. Peterson wasn't just a dismissive historian. He was a guardian of Willow Creek's darkest secrets, and he had just shown me, without saying a word, that he would protect them at all costs. The game had just begun, and the quarry, it seemed, was far more than just an abandoned hole in the ground. It was the gateway to whatever horror had claimed Sarah, Mark, Emily, and David, and countless others before them. And I had a cold, terrible feeling that I had just stepped into the deep eye myself. The cold, terrible feeling was a physical weight, pressing down on me, stealing the air from my lungs. My flashlight beam, usually a comforting spear of light, now seemed feeble, swallowed by the oppressive darkness that stretched before me. The air grew immediately colder, thick with the scent of damp earth, stagnant water, and something else, something metallic and ancient, like rust mixed with a faint, almost imperceptible ozone tang. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that was anything but silent. It was a silence filled with the drip of unseen water, the subtle creak of shifting earth, and the echo of my own ragged breath. I stood at the precipice of a narrow, downward-sloping tunnel. The entrance was rough-hewn, not naturally formed, but clearly excavated by human hands long ago, though now collapsing in places. Twisted, corroded metal supports jutted out from the rock, remnants of a forgotten mining operation. This wasn't just a pit, it was a scar on the earth, a forgotten artery leading into its depths. And I had just willingly stepped inside. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to scramble out of this suffocating maw and never look behind. But the faces of Sarah, Mark, Emily, and David flashed in my mind. Their desperate pleas, their family's agony. I couldn't. Not now. I had come too far. Taking a deep, shaky breath that did little to calm my racing pulse, I started forward, my boots crunching on loose gravel and small, sharp stones. The tunnel narrowed quickly, forcing me to crouch, then to nearly crawl in some sections. The walls were slick with condensation, and my hand brushed against something slimy and cold moss, or perhaps something worse. The beam of my flashlight danced ahead, revealing a labyrinth of shadows. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 10 minutes, the tunnel opened up into a larger, cavernous space. My flashlight struggled to illuminate the full extent of it. It was a vast chamber, far larger than I had anticipated, with a ceiling so high it vanished into the gloom. The air here was different, less stifling, but still heavy with that strange metallic odor. And a new smell, faint but distinct, decaying canvas. My beam swept across the floor, catching on something dark and angular. My breath hitched. It was a backpack. A faded, mud-caked hiking backpack, partially buried under a small rockfall. It looked exactly like the kind Mark would have carried, sturdy, practical, with a distinctive orange patch on one side. My hands trembled as I carefully approached, heart pounding a frantic rhythm. This was it, the first tangible link. I knelt, pushing away the loose rocks and dirt. The backpack was heavy, waterlogged, and covered in a fine layer of dust and grime, but undeniably Mark's. I recognized the patch, a small embroidered compass that Emily had given him as a good luck charm. With extreme care, I unzipped the main compartment. The fabric was stiff, the zipper protesting with a grating sound. Inside, everything was soaked but surprisingly intact. There was a waterproof case for a satellite phone, but the phone itself was missing. A small sealed plastic bag contained a half-eaten energy bar, a compass, and a crumpled map. But it was the journal that truly caught my attention. Tucked deep inside a secondary compartment, wrapped in a heavy-duty waterproof bag, was a small leather-bound notebook. Despite the dampness, the pages inside seemed mostly preserved. This was Mark's field journal. My fingers fumbled with the clasp, my eyes darting around the cavern, a primal fear prickling at the back of my neck. Was I alone? Had something watched Mark leave this here? Or had something made him leave it? Opening the journal, the first few pages were a blur of technical jargon about geological surveys, mineral deposits, and fault lines. Typical Mark. But as I flipped further, the entries became increasingly erratic, the handwriting more frantic. Date: October 17th. Anomaly detected. Readings off the charts. Not seismic. Something else. The old legends call it the deep eye. Sarah thinks it's just a localized magnetic field, but my instruments are picking up energy. Pulsating. Low frequency. It feels alive. My blood ran cold. He had been here. He had known. Date: October 19th. Emily is worried. David is skeptical but intrigued. Sarah is focused on the geological structure. I can't shake this feeling. The energy source is deep, and it's growing stronger. We've found ancient carvings near the primary shaft entrance. Symbols I've never seen. They depict figures almost human, but with elongated limbs and eyes that seem to gaze into nothingness. And a central symbol, a radiating circle like an eye. I looked up, my flashlight beam sweeping across the rough-hewn walls of the cavern. Nothing, just rock. But the description, a radiating circle like an eye. It was the symbol I had seen in the Old Town archives, etched into the faded maps of the forgotten mining claims. The symbol for the deep eye. Date: October 21st. The sound started today, faint at first. A low hum, almost subliminal, then clicks. Not natural, mechanical but organic at the same time. We tried to trace them. They're coming from deeper. From the source. Sarah's getting agitated. She says we're imagining things. David wants to push further. Emily just looks terrified. I could almost hear Emily's voice, her quiet, measured fear. She had always been the most sensitive. Date: October 22nd. The hum is constant now. It vibrates through the rock, through our bones. It's disorienting. We found a deeper shaft. Not a mine shaft. Something else. Circular. Perfect. Like it was drilled by something impossibly precise. Goes down endlessly. And the symbols are everywhere now on the walls, glowing faintly when the hum intensifies. They're not just carvings. They're part of the structure. A perfect circular shaft. Not a mine. This was something else entirely. Something unnatural. Date: October 23rd. We're losing track of time. The hum. It's in our heads. It's changing us. Sarah's arguing with David. Emily is withdrawn. I can feel it pulling at me, urging me deeper. That's watching. It wants us to see. It wants us to understand. But understanding comes at a price. The whispers, they're getting louder. Not in English. Not in any language I know. But I understand them. They speak of ancient knowledge, of power, of a way to transcend. But at what cost? My heart was a block of ice in my chest. Whispers. Transcendence? This wasn't a simple disappearance. This was something far more sinister, something that preyed on the mind. Date October 24th. They're gone. Sarah, David, Emily. They followed the whispers. They went down the perfect shaft. I tried to stop them, but the pull, it was too strong. I almost went with them. I fought it. I ran. I dropped my equipment. I don't know if I can get out. The hum is deafening. The symbols are burning into my vision. It's closing in. It's not just a place. It's a consciousness. And it's hungry. If anyone finds this, don't follow. Don't go deeper. Turn back while you still can. Because the final piece of evidence, it was hidden in plain sight. And it was never meant to be found. The entry ended abruptly, the last words scrawled almost illegibly, smeared with what looked like dried mud, or perhaps something darker. Mark had escaped, at least temporarily. He had left this journal here, an urgent, desperate warning. He had fought the pull. But where was he now? And what exactly had pulled Sarah, David, and Emily down that perfect shaft? I closed the journal, my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped it. The hum Mark described. I hadn't noticed it before, but now, reading his words, I could feel it. A low, almost imperceptible vibration, resonating not just through the rock, but through my own skull. It was faint, but it was there. A subtle pressure behind my eyes, a dull ache in my teeth. And the symbols. Mark said they were everywhere, glowing faintly. I swept my flashlight across the cavern walls again, more slowly this time, my eyes searching. And there it was, faintly etched into the rough rock, almost invisible until you knew what to look for, was the radiating circle, the eye. And next to it, another symbol and another. Not glowing, not yet, but undeniably present. An intricate, repetitive pattern that seemed to ripple across the stone, stretching deeper into the cavern, towards a darker opening I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't a natural opening. It was smooth, perfectly circular, precisely as Mark had described. The entrance to the perfect shaft. The gateway to where Sarah, David, and Emily had gone. And as I stared into its profound, inky blackness, the faint hum intensified just a fraction. A subtle change in the air pressure that made my ears pop. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a horrifying realization. Mark wasn't just warning me about a place. He was warning me about a presence. And that presence was still here. It was waiting. And I could feel its ancient, hungry gaze on me, pulling me towards that perfect, terrible void. The air grew cold, not just with the chill of the evening, but with a profound internal dread that seeped into my bones. Mark wasn't just warning me about the quarry, about the specific dangers of its depths or the instability of its rock faces. He was warning me about something else entirely, a palpable presence. It wasn't a ghost in the conventional sense, not a specter with chains or moans, but something far more ancient, more fundamental. It was a consciousness, a hunger, that had always existed in that place, perhaps even was that place. And it was still here. It was waiting, and I could feel its ancient, hungry gaze on me, pulling me towards that perfect, terrible void. A shiver, involuntary and violent, racked my body. My breath hitched, a desperate gasp for air that felt suddenly thin and insufficient. The feeling was overwhelming, a psychic weight pressing down, asserting its dominance. It wasn't just a feeling of being watched, it was a feeling of being chosen. The hairs on my arms stood on end, a primal instinct screaming at me to run, to flee, to put as much distance as possible between myself and the source of this profound unease. But another, more insidious current tugged at me. A morbid curiosity, a compulsion to understand, to confront. It was the same pull that had drawn Mark, and countless others, to their doom. I stumbled back from the desk, knocking over Mark's half-empty coffee mug, the cold liquid splashing across the scattered papers. I barely noticed. My eyes darted around the small, cluttered study, as if the presence itself might materialize from the shadows in the corners. But it wasn't a physical entity I feared, not truly. It was the insidious invasion of my mind, the way it twisted my thoughts, making the terrifying seem inevitable, the dangerous seem alluring. Mark's final, frantic notes suddenly took on a horrifying new context. His scribbled warnings about the draw, the whispers, the hungry earth. I had dismissed them as the ramblings of a man under extreme duress, perhaps even succumbing to a psychological break. Now I understood. He wasn't just paranoid. He was articulating a terrifying reality that defied conventional understanding. He wasn't just looking for evidence of a crime. He was fighting against an unseen predator. My gaze fell upon the detailed map of the quarry, pinned haphazardly to the corkboard above the desk. Mark had circled certain areas in red, not just the unstable ledges or deep water zones, but specific, seemingly innocuous points. A small, overgrown cave entrance. A cluster of unusually dark, jagged rocks. A section of the quarry wall where the limestone had eroded into a grotesque, almost skeletal formation. Before, I'd assumed these were points of interest for his geological research, or perhaps potential places where bodies might have been concealed. Now I saw them as points of power, notes of the presence's influence. The perfect, terrible void. It wasn't just the quarry itself. It was the core of this presence, the place where its hunger was strongest, where it drew its victims. And I knew with a sickening certainty that Mark had found it. And then, he had become another victim. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of the room. I had to go back. Not to the quarry generally, but to those specific points Mark had marked. The presence was calling me, yes, but it was also revealing itself through Mark's desperate last efforts. He had left a trail, a breadcrumb path not just of evidence but of warnings. I grabbed the map, my fingers trembling as I pulled it from the board. The red circles seemed to pulse with an ominous energy. I needed to understand what Mark had truly found, what he was trying to tell me before he vanished, before it claimed him. The night outside was deepening, the moon casting long, distorted shadows across the overgrown yard. Every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl, now sounded like a whisper, a subtle invitation, an ancient voice calling my name. I felt an almost irresistible urge to just walk out into the night, to let the presence guide me, to surrender to the pull. But Mark's face flashed in my mind, his haunted eyes, his desperate plea in that last voicemail. He wanted me to stop it, not join it. I forced myself to focus, to push past the suffocating fear. I needed to think logically, to rely on the detective skills I had honed over years, even if I was now dealing with something completely outside the realm of human crime. If this presence was real, if it was indeed responsible for the disappearances, then there had to be a pattern, a method, something tangible that connected its victims. My gaze drifted to Mark's meticulously organized filing cabinet. He had always been obsessive about his research, categorizing everything. I pulled open the top drawer, labeled Case Files, Quarry Disappearances. Inside, alongside police reports and witness statements, were several thick folders Mark had compiled himself. Each contained detailed background checks, personal histories, and even psychological profiles of the missing individuals. Sarah Jenkins, the thrill seeker; David Miller, the quiet historian; Emily Carter, the aspiring artist. I began to read, searching for any common thread beyond their connection to the quarry. Their ages varied, their backgrounds were diverse, their reasons for being near the quarry on the day they vanished were different. But as I flipped through the files, a subtle pattern began to emerge, something I had overlooked before, something Mark had probably been trying to piece together. It wasn't a physical characteristic or a social connection. It was something far more abstract, yet undeniably present in each case. Every single person, in the months leading up to their disappearance, had experienced a period of profound emotional vulnerability. Sarah Jenkins, recovering from a devastating breakup; David Miller, struggling with the recent death of his estranged father; Emily Carter, battling a severe creative block and depression. They were all, in their own ways, broken. They were all searching for something, an escape, a meaning, a new beginning. And the quarry, with its stark beauty and perilous depths, offered both. A metaphor for the abyss they felt within, or perhaps a literal gateway to it. The presence wasn't just pulling people randomly. It was preying on the vulnerable, on those whose internal defenses were down, whose souls were open to influence. It was a predator of the spirit, luring its victims with the promise of solace, of understanding, of an end to their suffering. But the end it offered was not peace. It was oblivion. This realization was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. It twisted the mystery from a simple missing persons case into something far more insidious. And it explained Mark's frantic descent. He wasn't just researching a geological anomaly or a series of unfortunate accidents. He was documenting a hunter, and he had become its next target, drawn in by his desperation to understand, to find answers, to bring justice. His vulnerability wasn't sadness or loss, but an insatiable thirst for truth. I scanned Mark's notes, looking for any mention of this emotional vulnerability, and there it was, buried deep within a chaotic page of observations, almost an afterthought. The resonance feeds on the void within, amplifies the ache, promises release. The resonance, that was what he called it. The pull, the hunger. It wasn't just about the physical location anymore. It was about the psychological landscape of its victims. And I too had been feeling vulnerable lately, haunted by Mark's disappearance, burdened by the weight of this investigation. Was I next? Was that why the gaze felt so intensely focused on me? I pushed that terrifying thought away. I had to be strong. I had to focus. If the presence targeted vulnerability, then understanding that was my shield. I wouldn't let it in. My eyes fell upon another of Mark's peculiar findings, taped to the inside of the cabinet door. A faded photograph of an old, intricate carving on a rock face. It was abstract, almost tribal, a swirling pattern that seemed to draw the eye inward, a spiral leading to a central empty space. Below it, Mark had scrawled a single word: petroglyph. Overlooked. The key. This wasn't just a random carving. It was an ancient symbol, perhaps a map, or a warning, or even a depiction of the presence itself. And Mark had called it the key. The key to what? To understanding the presence? To stopping it? Or to finding the perfect, terrible void it promised? I recognized the rock formation in the photograph from the map. It was one of the red-circled areas, the cluster of unusually dark, jagged rocks, nestled deep within the quarry's most isolated section. It was the place Mark had been trying to reach, the place he had warned me about. The final piece of evidence, hidden in plain sight for centuries, waiting for someone to truly see it. A sudden sharp crack echoed from downstairs. The old house settling, or something else? My heart leaped into my throat. The feeling of being watched intensified, a cold breath on my neck. It wasn't just in my head anymore. The presence was closer. It was here in the house, drawn by my increasing understanding, by my proximity to the truth. It was trying to stop me, or perhaps it was trying to lure me. I gripped the map and the photograph tighter, my knuckles white. Mark hadn't just left me a puzzle to solve. He had left me a gauntlet to run. And the next step, I knew, had to be to that petroglyph. To the heart of the quarry. To the very source of the perfect, terrible void. I knew with a chilling certainty that whatever lay there was the final piece of evidence, and it was waiting for me. The drive to the quarry felt like an ascent into another dimension. The world I knew, with its familiar streets and mundane worries, dissolved behind me, replaced by a landscape that grew increasingly rugged and alien. The road, once paved, gave way to gravel, then to little more than a dirt track winding through sparse, gnarled trees. The air grew still, heavy, as if the very atmosphere held its breath. It was late afternoon, the sun a bruised orange bleeding into the horizon, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters in my periphery. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded amplified, a prelude to something I couldn't quite grasp. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. I was alone, truly alone, in a place that felt ancient and forgotten. The quarry itself loomed ahead, a gaping wound in the earth, its sheer rock faces catching the last dying light. It was vast, far larger than I'd imagined from the maps, a testament to the relentless extraction that had shaped it. And somewhere within its desolate expanse, the petroglyph waited, the perfect, terrible void. I parked my car as far as I dared, the engine's final shudder echoing unnaturally loud. Stepping out, the cold, dry air prickled my skin. A faint breeze carried the scent of dust and stone, ancient and sterile. I pulled my jacket tighter, not just against the chill, but against the growing sense of dread that coiled in my gut. My flashlight, a heavy-duty beam, felt inadequate against the encroaching twilight. The coordinates Amelia had meticulously charted led me along a narrow, treacherous path, skirting the edge of dizzying drops. The scale of the quarry was disorienting. I felt like a tiny, insignificant speck on the edge of a colossal, silent maw. My eyes scanned the rock faces, searching for anything that resembled a symbol, a carving, anything that would stand out among the natural fissures and striations. Then I saw it. Not immediately, not obviously, but slowly, as if the rock itself chose to reveal it. It wasn't on a prominent, easily accessible wall. Instead, it was tucked away, almost concealed, within a shallow alcove at the base of a particularly sheer, dark cliff face. It was as if the creators had wanted it to be found only by those truly seeking it, those willing to venture deep into the quarry's heart. As I approached, the last vestiges of daylight faded, plunging the quarry into a deep, oppressive gloom. I clicked on my flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness, illuminating the petroglyph. It was larger than I expected, spanning several feet, etched deeply into the smooth, dark rock. The spiral was unmistakable, the same intricate, mesmerizing pattern I'd seen in Amelia's notes, on the sketch she'd left behind. But here, in its original form, it pulsed with an unsettling energy. It wasn't just a symbol. It felt like a gateway, an instruction, a diagram of something profound and terrifying. The spiral wasn't alone. Encircling it, almost like a frame, were smaller, more abstract symbols. They looked like a combination of ancient script and geometric patterns, unlike anything I'd ever encountered. My mind raced, trying to decipher them, but they remained stubbornly inscrutable. They seemed to hum with a silent language just out of my reach. I ran my fingers over the cold, rough stone, tracing the lines of the spiral. It felt impossibly old, imbued with centuries of unknown purpose. As my hand moved, my fingers brushed against something else, something hidden within one of the deeper grooves of the spiral. It wasn't part of the natural rock. It was a faint metallic sheen. My heart leaped into my throat. This was it, the hidden in plain sight. I shone my light closer, my breath catching in my chest. Embedded within the very heart of the spiral, almost perfectly camouflaged by the rock's natural texture and years of grime, was a small, perfectly circular indentation. And within that indentation, almost flush with the surface, was a tiny metallic disc. It was no bigger than a quarter, but its presence here, in this ancient, desolate place, screamed significance. With trembling fingers, I tried to pry it out, but it was set firmly. It wasn't meant to be removed, I realized. It was meant to be activated. I remembered Amelia's meticulous sketches, her obsession with precision. What if this wasn't just a symbol, but a mechanism? I examined the disc more closely. It had a tiny, almost invisible seam around its edge, and in its center a minute, almost imperceptible pinhole. It resembled a keyhole, but for a key unlike any I knew. My mind flashed back to the small, intricately carved wooden box Amelia had left behind. The one with the strange, almost organic keyhole. Could it be? I pulled out the box from my backpack, my hands shaking with anticipation and a growing sense of dread. The air around me seemed to thicken, the silence of the quarry becoming oppressive, almost sentient. I opened the box. Inside, nestled on velvet, lay the key. It was not a conventional key. It was a slender, delicate piece of polished, dark wood, intricately carved with the same spiral pattern as the petroglyph, ending in a tiny, almost needle-like point. This was it, the final piece of evidence, the key to the void. My hand trembled as I lifted the wooden key. It felt surprisingly warm against my cold skin, almost alive. I held it up to the metallic disc, aligning the intricate carving on the key with the subtle patterns I could now discern on the disc itself. The tiny point of the key fit perfectly into the pinhole. A wave of apprehension washed over me. What was I about to unlock? What terrifying truth lay dormant, waiting for this moment? Every instinct screamed at me to stop, to turn back, to leave this place and its dark secrets undisturbed. But the pull of the mystery, the desperate need to understand Amelia's fate and the disappearances, was too strong. I had to know. With a deep, shaky breath, I inserted the key fully and with a gentle click turned it clockwise. Nothing. My heart sank. Had I been wrong? Was this just a coincidence, a cruel misdirection? Then, as I began to withdraw the key, a low guttural hum vibrated through the rock face. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but one I felt deep in my bones, a resonant frequency that seemed to shake the very ground beneath my feet. The metallic disc, which had been flush with the rock, now recessed slightly, and from the pinhole, a faint ethereal blue light pulsed, growing steadily brighter. The symbols surrounding the main spiral began to glow, responding to the blue light, each one illuminating in sequence, like a complex circuit coming to life. The air grew colder, an unnatural chill that seemed to suck the warmth from my body. The hum intensified, becoming a low thrumming roar, vibrating through my entire being. And then the rock face itself began to move. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, a section of the cliff face, directly behind the glowing petroglyph, began to retract inward. It wasn't a door swinging open, but a massive slab of stone sliding back into the earth, revealing a dark, gaping aperture. The blue light from the disc intensified, casting an unearthly glow into the newly revealed space. It was a tunnel, a perfectly circular, impossibly smooth tunnel, carved into the very heart of the mountain. It descended steeply into the darkness, the blue light from the petroglyph casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and contort. The air that rushed out of the opening was stale, ancient, carrying a faint metallic tang. This was it, the void. Not a conceptual emptiness but a physical one, a meticulously hidden entrance to something far deeper, far more complex than I could have ever imagined. As I stared into the abyss, the hum of the petroglyph grew deafening, and the blue light pulsed with an almost alarming intensity. I took a hesitant step forward, my flashlight beam swallowed by the sheer depth of the tunnel. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, almost bitter. Then a sudden sharp clang echoed from deep within the tunnel, followed by a series of rhythmic, almost mechanical thuds. It wasn't the sound of natural rock or water. It was the sound of something operating, something man-made, deep within the earth. A chill that had nothing to do with the quarry's cold air snaked down my spine. I wasn't alone. This wasn't an abandoned ancient site. Someone was here. Or something. And whatever it was active. It was alive. My mind raced back to Amelia's final frantic message. The truth is hidden, but it's active. And David's disappearance. Jessica's warnings. Everything coalesced into a single terrifying realization. This wasn't merely an archaeological discovery. It was a clandestine operation. A secret project. And I had just activated its entrance. The blue light from the petroglyph pulsed once more. A final blinding flash, before dimming to a steady glow, illuminating the entrance to the tunnel like a beacon. The hum subsided to a low, constant thrum. The stone panel remained retracted, inviting me into the depths. I stood on the precipice, staring into the perfectly circular maw, a chilling certainty settling over me. The disappearances, the strange deaths, Amelia's obsession, the void itself. It all led here. To this hidden place deep beneath the quarry. This was not the end of the search. This was only the beginning of the true nightmare. And I knew with a terrifying clarity that I had to go in. I had to follow the blue light into the unknown, into the heart of the perfect, terrible void, to find Amelia, and to uncover whatever monstrous secret lay waiting. The final piece of evidence was hidden in plain sight. Yes, but it was merely the key to an even greater, more perilous truth. And it was waiting for me in the dark. And it was waiting for me in the dark. The words echoed in my mind, a chilling prophecy that propelled me back into the desolate silence of Amelia's apartment. The air still felt heavy with her absence, but now, a new current of urgency coursed through me. I wasn't just looking for clues anymore. I was hunting for the key to unlock a monstrous secret, a secret that Amelia had paid an unimaginable price to keep hidden, yet accessible. I started my search again, this time with a surgical precision born of desperation. Every object, every surface, every shadow was scrutinized. I ran my hands along the spines of her books, feeling for false bottoms or hidden compartments. I tapped on walls, listened for hollow sounds beneath floorboards, and even meticulously checked the lining of her clothes in the closet. My mind raced, trying to inhabit Amelia's last moments, to think as she would have thought. Where would a brilliant botanist, fearing for her life, hide something that was in plain sight, but held a perilous truth? The journal entries flashed through my memory. The garden, the watcher. Amelia had always found solace and order in the natural world. Her apartment, though now a tomb of memories, was once a vibrant ecosystem of potted plants, terrariums, and botanical sketches. My gaze swept over the collection of greenery, most of them now struggling for light and water in the absence of their meticulous caretaker. I dismissed them before, seeing them merely as part of her decor, a reflection of her passion. But what if one of them was more than that? What if one of them was the final piece? My eyes landed on a particular orchid, perched on a small sun-drenched table by the window. It was a Phalaenopsis bellina, a rare and exquisitely fragrant species, its waxy petals of vibrant fuchsia fading to white. Amelia had cherished this plant, often remarking on its resilience and its subtle, almost hidden beauty. She'd once told me it was more than just a flower to her. At the time, I'd assumed she meant its sentimental value or its botanical rarity. Now a cold dread crept up my spine. I approached the table, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The orchid, once meticulously cared for, now showed signs of neglect, a few leaves yellowing, its once perfect bloom slightly wilting. I gently lifted the ceramic pot, It felt ordinary, weighty with soil and roots. I turned it over, examining the glazed surface, feeling for any anomalies. Nothing. Just smooth ceramic. But then my thumb brushed against something almost imperceptible on the very bottom rim, near the drainage hole. It wasn't a crack, nor was it a chip. It was a series of faint, shallow etchings, almost invisible against the dark glaze. They were so subtle, so perfectly integrated into the pot's natural imperfections, that they could easily be mistaken for manufacturing defects. But knowing Amelia, knowing her precision, I knew this was no accident. My fingers traced the marks, a sequence of seemingly random alphanumeric characters. W7X9F2C5P1R38C. It meant nothing to me. It wasn't a phone number, not a date, not a simple password. It was a code. And if Amelia had gone to such lengths to hide it, it was a code worth breaking. I carefully set the pot down and began to frantically search for anything that could be a key. Amelia was a creature of habit, of logic. Her encryption methods, when she used them, were always rooted in something personal, something academic. I remembered her playful challenge once, asking me to decode a message using a specific botanical text. Could this be it? I scoured her bookshelves, specifically looking for her well-worn botanical texts. My gaze snagged on a thick leather-bound volume, much older than the others, Linnaeus's Species Plantarum. It was a foundational work in botany, dusty and filled with Amelia's copious annotations in the margins, tiny, elegant script, cross-references, and even small drawings. This had to be it. I pulled it from the shelf, its pages brittle with age. My fingers trembled as I fanned through the book, searching for any pattern, any clue that might link to the etched code. I recalled Amelia's method. Sometimes she'd use a specific page number, then a word count on that page, or even the first letter of a plant name on a certain line. My eyes darted between the etched code on the pot and the dense text of the Linnaeus book. I started with the first segment, W7X. I tried page 7, then looked for words starting with W or X. Nothing immediately jumped out. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to slow down, to think like Amelia. She wouldn't make it easy, but she wouldn't make it impossible. Her codes always had a logical, elegant solution. Then a thought struck me. What if the code wasn't about page numbers and words, but about taxonomic classification? Amelia was obsessed with the precise naming conventions of plants. Linnaeus was the father of modern taxonomy. I went back to the first segment, W7X. I remembered Amelia talking about a system where certain letters represented families, genera, or species. I flipped to the index, looking for any specific plants she had underlined, any particular pages she had dog-eared. And there it was on page 7, a small, almost invisible asterisk next to the entry for Welwitschia mirabilis, a unique desert plant. Next to it, in Amelia's tiny script, was the letter X. My heart leaped. This was it. The W was for Welwitschia. The 7 was the page number. And the X was a specific marker she used to indicate a secondary reference point. I followed the annotations, cross-referencing them with the etched code segment by segment. It was painstaking, requiring me to decipher her personal shorthand and her intricate knowledge of botanical nomenclature. Each segment of the code led me to a specific page, a specific genus, a specific annotation. It took what felt like an eternity, my mind racing through botanical Latin and cryptic notes, but slowly, agonizingly, a message began to emerge. I pieced together the fragments, writing them down on a scrap of paper, the words forming a chilling revelation. They took me. Westgate Labs. Level B7. Access code 834-512-907. Find the Arbor Vitae file. Don't trust anyone named Stone. My hand froze, the pen hovering over the paper. Westgate Labs. A name I recognized. A massive, privately funded research facility, known for its groundbreaking but often controversial work in genetic engineering and biotechnology. Whispers of unethical experiments and corporate secrecy had always surrounded it, but it was practically impenetrable, a fortress of science. Level B7, an access code, and a file name, Arbor Vitae, Latin for Tree of Life. It sounded like something out of a science fiction novel, a project of immense ambition and potentially immense danger. And don't trust anyone named Stone. Who was Stone? A colleague? A superior? An antagonist? The warning was stark, a final desperate plea from Amelia. She hadn't just disappeared, she had been taken, abducted, silenced, and she had left this message, this lifeline, knowing that if I found it, I would be stepping into the same perilous current that had swept her away. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Amelia wasn't just a botanist. She was an investigative botanist, uncovering something so profound, so dangerous, that a powerful organization had resorted to kidnapping to silence her. I was no longer just searching for a missing person. I was now holding the very evidence that could expose a vast conspiracy. A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. The watcher from her journal wasn't just a stalker. It was an operative, an organization with limitless resources and a terrifying willingness to eliminate anyone who got in their way. And now I had just unlocked their secret. As the final chilling words of Amelia's message solidified in my mind, a sudden sharp thump echoed through the apartment. It came from the front door, a heavy resonant sound, as if something substantial had been thrown against it, or perhaps someone was trying to force entry. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone. I had been found. The hunters were here. My breath hitched in my throat. I squeezed the Linnaeus book, the etched orchid pot, and Amelia's journal tightly to my chest. I had the final piece, the key to everything. But in finding it, I had also painted a target squarely on my back. The dark was no longer waiting for me. It was already here at the door. I had to move, and I had to move now. I had to move, and I had to move now. The faint click from downstairs echoed in the oppressive silence, confirming my worst fears. They weren't just outside, they were in. My heart hammered against my ribs, the journal a cold, heavy weight in my hand, a beacon of truth and a target. I scrambled away from the attic entrance, my eyes darting around the small, dusty space. The window, barely wide enough for a child, was my only exit. Footsteps thudded on the stairs, growing louder, closer. A man's voice, low and gruff, called out something I couldn't quite make out, but the intent was clear. They were hunting me. Panic threatened to overwhelm me, but the sheer urgency of the moment forced a brutal clarity. I yanked at the window latch, rusty and stiff, gritting my teeth as it finally groaned open. A cold gust of night air rushed in, carrying the scent of damp earth and distant pine. I squeezed through the narrow opening, scraping my shoulder painfully against the splintered frame. My feet dangled precariously above an overgrown rose bush below. I didn't hesitate. I dropped, landing with a jarring thud amidst thorny branches, the impact sending a sharp pain up my leg. I bit back a cry, pushing myself up, tearing my shirt and skin on the thorns. Above me, the attic window was already a dark silhouette, and I could hear the frantic shouts of men inside the house. I didn't look back. I plunged into the dense woods bordering the property, the familiar darkness now a welcome cloak. Branches whipped at my face, roots tripped my feet, but I ran, fueled by adrenaline and the desperate need to protect the journal. It wasn't just my life at stake, it was the truth. Their truth, the one they'd killed to bury. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached, until the sounds of pursuit faded into the distant hum of the forest. Only then did I allow myself to stop, leaning against the rough bark of an old oak, gasping for breath, the journal still clutched tightly to my chest. My phone, remarkably, was still in my pocket. No signal. Of course. I was deep in the wilderness, miles from any main road. I needed to disappear, to find somewhere safe to finally read what I held. The old hunting cabin, deep in the state park, miles from here, was my only option. It was a relic, rarely used, unregistered, and virtually forgotten. It would take hours to reach on foot, but it was my best bet for solitude. The journey was a blur of aching muscles and gnawing fear. Every snapping twig, every rustle in the undergrowth, sent shivers down my spine. I pushed through the night, driven by the knowledge that I was carrying a secret that powerful people wanted silenced. By dawn, exhausted and covered in mud and scratches, I finally stumbled upon the cabin. It was even more dilapidated than I remembered, but the lock was still intact, a rusty testament to its forgotten status. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light piercing through gaps in the boarded-up windows. I barricaded the door with a fallen beam, then sank onto the dirt floor, my body screaming in protest. With trembling hands, I finally opened the journal. It was a simple leather-bound notebook, its pages filled with neat looping script. The handwriting was unmistakably Sarah Jenkins. My heart sank. Sarah, the woman whose accident had started this whole nightmare. But this wasn't a personal diary. This was a meticulously kept log. The first few entries were mundane, detailing her work as an environmental consultant. She was cataloging local flora and fauna, assessing the impact of a new proposed luxury development called Whispering Pines Estates, a massive project pushed by local magnate Richard Vance. Vance's name had come up before, always skirting the edges of the initial investigation, but never directly implicated. As I turned the pages, Sarah's entries became more specific, more urgent. She had discovered discrepancies, not just minor ones but significant environmental violations being systematically overlooked. Permits fast-tracked, inspections rubber-stamped. It was all laid out date by date, name by name. She suspected bribery, influence peddling. She'd started cross-referencing public records, land deeds, campaign finance reports. She listed names: Councilman Thomas Miller, head of the zoning board; Detective Robert Hayes, who had mysteriously been promoted to lead the initial accident investigation; and of course Richard Vance, the architect of Whispering Pines. Then came the startling revelation. Sarah hadn't been working alone. She had an informant, someone on the inside. She referred to him only as M. M had provided her with internal documents, meeting minutes, even recordings. He was her eyes and ears within Vance's organization. My breath hitched. M. Could it be Michael Davis? My old friend, the one who tried to warn me off, the one who seemed so afraid? He worked for Vance's legal team. It made a chilling, terrifying kind of sense. Michael had been trying to protect me by keeping me away, not because he was involved, but because he knew how dangerous this was. The journal continued, detailing Sarah's growing fear. She knew she was being watched. She wrote about unusual car sightings, strange phone calls, a feeling of unease that never left her. She started hiding her research, making copies, sending encrypted files to a secure server. She was preparing for the worst. Then, an entry dated just 2 days before her accident. It was short, terse, and chilling. M confirmed it. They know I'm onto them. Vance is meeting with Miller and Hayes at the old mill. Tonight, they're discussing damage control. This is bigger than I thought. The plain sight trick. It's brilliant, insidious. They're using the very thing no one would ever suspect. I reread the last sentence, my mind racing. The plain sight trick. What could it be? What was so obvious, so visible, that no one would ever question it? The next entry was even more cryptic. Found it. The ledger. Tucked away in the most obvious place. Vance's private office. It's not just financials. It's a roster. Not just local. This goes higher. This is why M is so scared. They're moving the money through shell corporations, tied to federal grants for infrastructure. The plain sight trick. It's the source of the funds. Federal grants for infrastructure. Whispering Pines Estates wasn't just a local housing development. It was a front, a way to launder money, to funnel public funds into private pockets. And the plain sight part? It wasn't the evidence itself, but the mechanism of the crime. They were hiding in plain sight by using legitimate government projects as their cover. Sarah had found a ledger, a physical book, detailing this vast network of corruption, not just local but national. And she had found it in Vance's private office. This journal, then, was the key to understanding her key. The final entry was just a few lines, scrawled hastily, the handwriting shaky. They're coming for me. Hayes is involved. He staged the accident. He's covering up for Vance. I sent the files to my sister, Jessica. She doesn't know what they are, just that they're important. If anything happens to me, tell her to look for Project Nightingale. It's the code for the ledger. It's all there. The names, the dates, the plain sight money trail. Don't trust anyone, especially not. The entry abruptly cut off, a dark smudge of what looked like dried blood marring the page. Sarah had been killed before she could finish that last sentence. Hayes, the detective, had staged her accident. He was part of it. My blood ran cold. The man who was supposed to be investigating her death was the one who caused it. And then it hit me. Jessica, Sarah's sister. She had the encrypted files. The ledger. It was the real final piece of evidence. And it was hidden, not in a dusty attic, but in an encrypted file, likely on a drive or cloud storage, entrusted to an unsuspecting relative. Jessica had no idea she was holding the smoking gun. I closed the journal, my mind reeling. The picture was complete, horrifyingly so. Vance, Miller, Hayes, and a network that extended far beyond this small town. all connected by a web of corruption and murder, using federal infrastructure projects as their elaborate laundering scheme. Sarah had uncovered all of it and paid the ultimate price. Now I was the one holding her truth, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to find Jessica. I had to get those files. But first, I needed a way out of here, and a way to communicate without alerting the very people who were undoubtedly still hunting me. The stakes had just been raised, from a local mystery to a national conspiracy, and I was standing right in the middle of it. My heart throbbed a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure adrenaline and survival instinct. The abandoned warehouse, once a sanctuary, now felt like a death trap. Every creak of the old metal, every whisper of the wind through broken panes, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. I couldn't stay. Not here, not anywhere I could easily be tracked. My phone, my laptop, my car. Every modern convenience was a potential leash back to those who wanted me silenced. I needed to go dark, truly dark. My mind raced, sifting through memories, searching for an escape route, a forgotten resource. And then it hit me. Years ago, after a particularly paranoid deep dive into digital security, I had assembled an emergency kit. Not for a natural disaster, but for a digital one. Tucked away in the false bottom of an old toolbox in my grandfather's forgotten shed. A shed so crammed with rusty relics and dusty memories that no one had touched it in decades, was a burner phone. An ancient flip phone, purchased with cash from a prepaid store long out of business, with a preloaded SIM card that had never been activated. No data, no GPS, just calls and texts. Primitive but secure. The shed was a 10-mile trek through dense woods, a journey I couldn't risk in daylight. I spent the rest of the night in the darkest corner of the warehouse, huddled amongst forgotten crates, my senses hyper-alert, every shadow a potential threat. The first hint of dawn, a faint gray bleeding into the bruised sky, was my signal. I moved silently, a ghost in the urban twilight, using back alleys and overgrown paths, keeping to the shadows. My clothes were torn, my face grimy, but the urgency propelled me forward. Reaching the shed was an exercise in pure paranoia. Every rustle of leaves, every distant car horn, felt like a siren call. I slipped inside, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying wood. The toolbox was exactly where I'd left it, buried under a pile of old tarps. My fingers fumbled, adrenaline making them clumsy, but I found the hidden compartment. Inside, wrapped in a plastic bag, was the relic, a chunky black flip phone, and a single pre-written note I'd pinned years ago. A list of emergency contacts, all memorized, all disconnected from my regular life. One name stood out, Sarah Chun, an old colleague from my days as a low-level data analyst, before I'd stumbled into the rabbit hole of intelligence. Sarah was sharp, cynical, and fiercely loyal. More importantly, she had a cousin who worked for the National Sentinel, a reputable, if sometimes sensationalist, investigative newspaper. She was my bridge. I powered on the phone. The screen flickered to life. A low-res display, a stark contrast to the smartphones I was used to. No internet, no apps, just a signal bar that thankfully glowed green. I scrolled through the few saved numbers, finding Sarah's. My thumb hovered over the call button. A direct call was too risky. Even a burner phone could be triangulated if they had the resources. I needed a harder-to-trace method. The note. I remembered a specific obscure dead drop we'd used once for a silly office prank, a hollowed-out bird feeder in a rarely visited section of the city's arboretum, near the old oak tree by Miller's Creek. It was a place only Sarah and I knew about, a forgotten corner of the park. It was risky, but less so than a direct call. I typed a brief, coded message. Sarah, it's Michael. The Riverstone Project. It's real. They're after me. I need you to contact David Miller at the National Sentinel. Tell him the heron flies at dawn. He'll know what that means. Don't use your phone. Use a public library terminal to send this. Meet me at the Old Oak, Miller's Creek, midnight, 2 days from now. Come alone. Don't bring anything traceable. I sent the message to her old, rarely checked email address, hoping she still used it occasionally. It was a long shot, but it was the best I had. Then I pocketed the phone, the weight of it a strange comfort and a terrifying burden. I couldn't risk carrying it for long. I'd ditch it after I knew the message was sent, or if I had to move again. The next 2 days were a blur of movement and paranoia. I scavenged for food, slept in abandoned buildings, and walked miles under the cover of darkness. My mind, however, was not idle. The phrase hidden in plain sight echoed through my thoughts. What had I missed? What crucial detail had been staring me in the face all this time, dismissed as irrelevant? I replayed every conversation, every document, every image from the Riverstone files. The initial reports about the missing scientists, the hushed whispers of experimental energy sources, the sudden unexplained closure of the research facility. All of it had been framed as a government cover-up of a failed project, a way to bury embarrassing mistakes. But what if the cover-up itself was the plain sight? What if the narrative they fed the public was the most elaborate disguise? Then a flicker. A memory from an old, grainy photograph I'd seen in a discarded file. A group shot of the lead scientists at the original Riverstone facility. One of them, a man named Dr. Elias Thorne, had a distinctive, almost archaic watch. Not a smartwatch, not even a modern digital one, but an old-fashioned pocket watch, visible just barely peeking from his vest pocket. I dismissed it as a quirky personal detail. But what if it wasn't? What if it was a key? Pocket watches often had engravings, sometimes even hidden compartments. It was a long shot, but in a world where everything was being tracked digitally, an analog object, a personal affectation, could be the perfect place to hide something. But why would he hide it? And why would it be the final piece of evidence? My thoughts spiraled, connecting dots that felt both flimsy and terrifyingly solid. The sudden disappearances, the staged accidents, the swiftness with which the Riverstone project had been erased from public record. It wasn't about a failed experiment. It was about something that succeeded, something so profound and so dangerous that its existence had to be obliterated. And Dr. Thorne, perhaps, was the one who saw it coming, who tried to leave a breadcrumb. The old oak tree at Miller's Creek. It stood alone, a sentry against the urban sprawl, its gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers towards the sky. Midnight, 2 days after I sent the message. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I arrived early, hiding amongst the dense undergrowth, my nerves frayed, every shadow a potential ambush. The city lights glowed faintly in the distance, a deceptive blanket of normalcy. What if Sarah hadn't gotten the message? What if she hadn't believed me? Or worse, what if they had intercepted it? Then a rustle. A figure emerged from the darkness, moving cautiously, a small flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Sarah. Her silhouette was unmistakable, her posture tense. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by a fresh wave of fear. She was here. That meant she believed me, but it also meant I had just pulled her into the deadliest game of my life. I waited until she was directly under the oak, her head turning, scanning the darkness, her breath visible in the cool night air. Sarah, I whispered, stepping out from behind the thick trunk. She gasped, spinning around, her flashlight beam momentarily blinding me. Michael! Oh my God, you look terrible. Her voice was a strained whisper, laced with genuine concern. Things have been better, I replied, a grim attempt at humor. Did you get my message? Did you contact Miller? She nodded, her eyes wide. Yes, I used a library computer, David. He was skeptical at first, but when I told him the heron flies at dawn, his whole demeanor changed. He said he'd make some calls, start digging. He said that phrase was a code from an old cold case, something about a whistleblower who vanished years ago, tied to a government research project. He said it meant critical intelligence received, proceed with utmost caution. A knot in my stomach tightened. Good. He's the only one I trust outside of this mess. Now here's what I need you to do next. It's about Dr. Elias Thorne, the lead scientist from Riverstone. I think he hid something. Something in plain sight. Sarah frowned, her brow furrowed in concentration. Dr. Thorne? He was officially declared deceased years ago. A boating accident. Staged? I countered, my voice low and firm. Just like everything else. I need you to find out everything you can about him. His personal effects, his home, his habits. Specifically, I need you to look for a pocket watch. An old, distinctive one. It might have been overlooked, dismissed as sentimental junk. But I have a gut feeling. That watch. It could be the key to everything. Her eyes widened further, reflecting the faint city glow. A pocket watch? Michael, that's incredibly specific. How could a pocket watch be the key to a national conspiracy? Because, I explained, leaning closer, when you're trying to hide the truth about something so monumental, something that could change the world, you don't bury it in a secure server or a locked vault. You hide it somewhere so utterly mundane, so perfectly analog that no one would ever think to look. You hide it in plain sight. I paused, letting the gravity of my words sink in. They're not just trying to cover up a failed experiment, Sarah. They're trying to bury a success. A terrifying, world-altering success. And I think Dr. Thorne knew it. I think he left us a message, a final piece of evidence tucked away in that watch. Something that reveals the true nature of Project Riverstone. Something that explains why they're willing to kill to keep it secret. Sarah took a deep, shaky breath. Okay, I understand. I'll reach out to David. He has contacts in archival research, old police records. It won't be easy, but I'll try. Be careful, Sarah. I warned, my voice heavy with genuine fear for her. They're everywhere. Don't use your phone. Don't go anywhere obvious. If you find anything at all, send a message to David Miller. Using the code "The Heron has landed." He'll know to relay it to me through a secure channel we'll establish. She nodded, her face grim but resolute. What about you? Where will you go? Further off the grid, I said, glancing into the impenetrable darkness beyond the park. I need to become a ghost. But I'll be listening. And I'll be waiting for it. The heron has landed. With a final urgent look, I melted back into the shadows, leaving Sarah alone under the ancient oak. The hunt was on, not just for me, but for a forgotten piece of metal, a relic of a bygone era, that held the truth of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond anything I could have imagined. And the clock was ticking. The clock was ticking, not just for my freedom, but for Sarah's safety and the truth of what David had uncovered. I ran, faster than I thought possible, the adrenaline a bitter taste in my mouth, the image of Sarah alone under that ancient oak tree burning in my mind. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle of leaves a potential pursuer. I pushed through the dense undergrowth, branches whipping at my face, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves filling my nostrils. When I burst into the clearing, Sarah was exactly where I'd left her, huddled at the base of the colossal oak, her face pale in the faint moonlight filtering through the canopy. She looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and relief as she saw me. "Michael, thank goodness," she whispered, scrambling to her feet. Did you get away?" "For now," I panted, my lungs burning. "They're close. We don't have much time. Did you find anything? Anything at all that David might have mentioned about this tree? Anything he might have hidden here?" Sarah shook her head, her gaze sweeping desperately across the gnarled roots that spread like ancient serpents across the ground. "I've been looking, but there's nothing obvious. He loved this tree, called it his thinking spot, his quiet place, said it held secrets." Her voice trailed off, a fresh wave of despair washing over her. "Secrets," I repeated, scanning the massive trunk. "He wouldn't just leave it out in the open." "Think, Sarah. Did he ever talk about anything specific? A particular root, a hollow, a kind of stone?" She closed her eyes, concentrating, then her eyes flew open. "Wait. He did say something once, years ago. He was showing me this old antique compass he'd found, said it was more than just a guide. He said he sometimes left it to point the way home when he was out here. He loved riddles, and he had this fascination with the true north of things, not just on a map, but in history, in truth." "A compass?" I frowned. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," she cried, her voice laced with frustration. "But he used to joke about how the true north of this tree was different from the magnetic north. He'd point to a specific spot, always the same one, and say that's where the heart of it lies." I thought he was just being whimsical. My gaze snapped to the base of the tree, following an imaginary line from where she might have remembered him pointing. The roots were a labyrinth, twisted and thick, creating natural hollows and crevices. "Where would that be, Sarah? Show me." She hesitated, then walked slowly, her eyes tracing the contours of the bark-covered earth. She stopped at a particularly large root, one that formed a natural alcove, partially obscured by moss and fallen leaves. "Here," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He'd always stand right here and point there." She indicated a small, almost imperceptible cavity in the root, just above the soil line, shielded by a curtain of hanging ivy. My heart hammered. It was a perfect hiding spot, easily overlooked, yet right there in plain sight. I dropped to my knees, my fingers trembling as I pushed aside the ivy. The cavity was small, just large enough for a hand. I reached in, my fingers brushing against something cold, metallic. I pulled it out. It was an antique compass, just as Sarah had described. Heavy, intricately designed with a tarnished brass casing. It looked like something from another century, a collector's piece. But there was something off about it. The glass was strangely thick, almost opaque in parts, and the needle was stuck, pointing resolutely to one specific direction, not north but to the heart of the tree, as if frozen in time. "This is it," I breathed, turning it over in my hand. There were no obvious seams, no buttons, no visible way to open it. It felt solid, a single piece of metal. Sarah's eyes were wide with anticipation. "What is it, Michael? What does it do?" "It's not just a compass," I murmured, remembering David's words. I ran my thumb over the brass. There were faint, almost invisible etchings on the back. Not decorative, but symbols. A stylized capital M, a serpent intertwined with a staff, and a series of dots and dashes. Morse code? David had a magnifying glass he always kept in his study, Sarah said suddenly. A jeweler's loupe. He used it for all his tiny historical finds. "We don't have time to go back to his study," I said, my gaze sweeping the perimeter. The forest was growing darker, the moon sinking lower. I could almost feel their presence, a cold dread creeping up my spine. Then a glint of light caught my eye. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer from the compass. I angled it slightly, and in the moonlight, a tiny, almost hidden button, no larger than a pinprick, became visible on the side, disguised as part of the decorative engraving. With a surge of hope, I pressed it. There was a faint click, almost inaudible. The top of the compass, instead of merely being a cover, hinged open, revealing not a compass rose, but a shallow circular compartment. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a single impossibly thin metallic disc. It was smaller than a dime, but gleamed with a strange, almost ethereal light. It wasn't a coin nor a data chip I recognized. It looked ancient, yet impossibly advanced. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, leaning closer, her breath catching. "I have no idea," I admitted, carefully prying it out with the tip of my nail. It felt cool and smooth in my palm, surprisingly light. It had intricate, microscopic patterns etched onto its surface, like a miniature blueprint. But this is the final piece of evidence. This is what David died for. Just as I held it up, a twig snapped nearby. Not a natural sound, but the heavy, deliberate crunch of a boot. My head whipped up. The shadows between the trees seemed to deepen, to coalesce into vague, menacing shapes. "They're here," I hissed, grabbing Sarah's arm. "We have to go. Now." We scrambled to our feet, but it was too late. From 3 different directions, figures emerged from the tree line. Dark clothes, balaclavas obscuring their faces, and the unmistakable glint of flashlights cutting through the gloom. They were fast, silent, and closing in. "Sarah, run!" I yelled, pushing her behind me. "Go, get to the road, find help." But she didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the metallic disc in my hand, then on the approaching figures. "No, Michael. We have to know what this is." David risked everything for it. The lead figure, taller and broader than the others, stopped about 20 feet away. He didn't speak, but his posture radiated menace. His gloved hand gestured, and the other 2 fanned out, cutting off our escape routes. We were trapped, backed against the ancient oak, the compass and its mysterious disc clutched tightly in my hand. "Give it to us." A voice, distorted and metallic through some kind of voice changer, boomed from the lead figure. "It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the truth." I retorted, my own voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coiling in my gut. "What is this?" What was David working on? The figure took a step closer. He was working on something he shouldn't have been. Something that could unravel decades of progress. "This truth you speak of is a dangerous lie. It will only bring chaos." "Chaos? Or justice?" Sarah cried, stepping out from behind me, her fear momentarily overcome by defiance. "What is the Meridian Project? Is that what this is about?" A palpable tension filled the air. The lead operative froze. Even in the dim light, I could sense a ripple of surprise, perhaps even anger, from the figure. "You know that name?" The voice hissed, sharper this time. "He told you." "He left clues," I said quickly, trying to draw their attention back to me. "Enough to know you killed him to keep it secret. What is the Meridian Project? What's on this disc?" The operative didn't answer directly. Instead, he raised a hand. "Take them. Get the artifact. No unnecessary force, but do not fail." The two flanking operatives lunged. I reacted on instinct, shoving Sarah hard to the side and ducking under the arm of the first attacker. The ancient oak, once a symbol of peace, now felt like a cage. I scrambled around its massive trunk, trying to buy us a few precious seconds, the metallic disc still clutched in my hand. Sarah, find his old laptop, the one he kept locked away. He always said it had a special reader for his treasures. I yelled, hoping she would hear me, hoping she would understand. She was already moving, weaving between roots, trying to create distance. The operatives were relentless, their movements precise and practiced. They weren't just thugs, they were professionals. One of them tackled me, sending me sprawling to the ground, the breath knocked out of my lungs. My hand flew open and the antique compass clattered away, but I still held the tiny disc, my fingers clamped around it like a vice. A heavy boot pressed down on my arm, pinning me. The operative's face was still obscured, but I could feel the cold, hard plastic of his mask against my cheek as he leaned in. "Give it to me," he growled, his voice a low rumble. "This ends here." I twisted, trying to dislodge him, but he was too strong. My vision blurred, spots dancing before my eyes. He reached for my hand, his gloved fingers prying at mine. I could feel the tiny disc slipping, the smooth metal threatening to escape my grasp. In that moment of desperation, a flash of something caught my eye. A glint of metal, barely visible, embedded deep within the bark of the oak, almost completely swallowed by decades of growth. It wasn't part of the tree. It was a small square plate, no bigger than my thumb, with a tiny, almost invisible slot. David's laptop, the special reader. This wasn't just a tree. It was David's ultimate hiding place, his final failsafe. He hadn't just hidden the disc. He'd hidden the key to unlocking its secrets, right here, in the very heart of his sanctuary. With a final desperate surge of adrenaline, I screamed, "Sarah, the tree! Look for the slot!" The operative's grip tightened, his hand finally closing over mine, forcing my fingers open. The metallic disc slipped free, tumbling from my grasp. It flew through the air, a tiny gleaming projectile, arcing towards the ancient oak. Everything seemed to slow down. The operative cried out, lunging for it. Sarah, seeing my desperate plea, spun around, her eyes scanning the bark. The disc spun, caught the moonlight, and then with an almost poetic precision, it slid perfectly into the tiny, hidden slot in the tree. A soft click echoed through the silent forest. A faint, almost ethereal glow emanated from the spot where the disc had vanished, illuminating the ancient bark. The operative who had been pinning me let out a guttural roar of frustration and pain, abandoning me to lunge for the tree. But it was too late. The slot closed, sealing the disc within. And as the glow intensified, a soft, low hum began to vibrate through the earth, through the very roots of the ancient oak, a sound that resonated deep within my bones. The operatives froze, their menacing forms silhouetted against the strange, growing light. Their metallic voices, usually so controlled, were now filled with a chilling uncertainty. What has he done? I pushed myself up, my body aching, my mind reeling. The hum grew louder, more resonant. The light pulsed, casting long, dancing shadows. David hadn't just hidden the evidence. He had engineered a way for the tree itself to reveal it. This wasn't merely a storage device, it was a trigger. The ancient oak, his sanctuary, was now a conduit. And whatever truth it was about to unleash, it was far, far bigger than I had ever imagined. The Meridian Project. The name echoed in my mind, and in that moment, as the ground began to tremble beneath my feet, I knew we had just activated something monumental, something that would change everything. And the operatives knew it too. Their fear was palpable. The final, devastating truth was about to be laid bare. The cavernous space around me roared to life, not with an explosion, but with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through my bones. Dust rained from the ceiling, ancient rock formations groaning under an unseen pressure. The operatives, frozen moments before in their attempt to stop me, now scrambled, shouting orders into comms that crackled with static. Their faces, usually composed and unreadable, were contorted with genuine terror. They knew this wasn't part of the plan. This wasn't just a simple activation, it was a system-wide cascade. A network of faint blue lines began to pulse across the floor, tracing intricate geometric patterns that converged on a central point. Then, with a sound like 1,000 gears grinding in perfect unison, the entire central platform, the very one I stood near, began to descend slowly, revealing an abyss of pure, inky blackness beneath. But it wasn't empty. From the depths, a blinding column of pure, white light erupted, piercing the darkness and hitting the colossal ceiling above. The light wasn't static. It shimmered, coalesced, and then slowly began to form images. Not on a screen but within the light itself. The air around me became a canvas, a three-dimensional projection of staggering detail. It started with a single innocuous photograph. A group of seemingly ordinary men in the 1950s smiling, shaking hands, perhaps at a corporate picnic. But then the projection shifted, zoomed in, and overlaid the image with text, dates, and connections. A name, David Miller, flashed beside one man's face. Then, a line extending from him to another face, a woman named Emily Hayes, then another, Michael Vance. The network grew, spreading across the entire cavern, encompassing us in a web of information. This wasn't just a display. It was a living, breathing archive. It detailed a meticulously constructed, multi-generational conspiracy. The initial photo was just the tip of the iceberg. The projection unfurled, revealing how these individuals, seemingly disconnected, were architects of a shadow organization. It showed their influence over major corporations, their infiltration of government agencies, their subtle manipulation of public opinion through media outlets. Dates flashed by, marking key historical events, economic downturns, political scandals, even technological breakthroughs, all linked back to this covert group. I saw faces I recognized from history books, powerful figures who had shaped the narrative of the past century. But here they weren't the heroes or villains we knew. They were puppets or perhaps unwitting instruments in a much larger game. The projection showed financial transactions, encrypted communications, and coded directives, all pointing to a singular, chilling agenda. The gradual, almost imperceptible consolidation of power and control, disguised as progress, patriotism, or philanthropy. One operative, a burly man named Robert, screamed, "Shut it down! Now!" He lunged for a console, his fingers flying across the interface, but the projection didn't falter. In fact, it seemed to intensify, the data streams flowing faster, the connections becoming clearer. The system wasn't just activated, it was broadcasting, undeniably and irreversibly. The fear on their faces morphed into desperation. They weren't just protecting a secret, they were guarding the narrative of their entire existence, and it was crumbling around them. The final piece of evidence wasn't a document or a device. It was this entire self-activating holographic history. This facility wasn't just a base of operations. It was a massive, intricate vault, designed not to hide the truth, but to reveal it, once the correct sequence was initiated. It was a fail-safe built by someone long ago, perhaps an internal dissident, or an architect with a conscience, who foresaw this very moment. The projection zoomed in on a specific timeline, showing the rise of a clandestine council, their members rotating, their influence expanding. It showed how seemingly independent think tanks and lobbying groups were all conduits for their agenda. It illustrated how public discourse was shaped, how fears were manufactured, and how dissent was subtly neutralized. The scale of it was breathtaking, terrifying. It wasn't a theory. It was a documented, irrefutable blueprint of control. "It's too late!" I yelled over the hum of the projection, my voice raw with a mixture of awe and horror. "It's broadcasting! This isn't just local." Another operative, a woman named Sarah, pulled a sidearm, aiming it not at me, but at the glowing central column. "Destroy the core!" she shrieked. But before she could fire, the ground beneath us bucked again, a more violent tremor this time. The blue lines on the floor pulsed fiercely, and a high-pitched whine filled the air. The system was reacting to their aggression. It wasn't just a passive display, it was an active defense. Sections of the cavern that had seemed solid now began to shift, revealing hidden conduits, glowing energy lines, and what looked like automated defense turrets emerging from recessed panels in the walls. They were not designed for human combat, but to protect the core system from internal sabotage. The operatives, caught between trying to shut down the overwhelming projection and defending themselves from their own facility's defenses, were in chaos. Robert tried to smash a console with the butt of his rifle, but a surge of energy arced from the panel, throwing him backward. Sarah fired at the central light column, but the energy seemed to dissipate around it, leaving no mark. I knew this was my chance. The information was too vast to simply observe. I needed to secure it, to download it, to make sure it reached the outside world. My eyes scanned the holographic deluge, looking for a nexus, a point of access. The data streams were flowing from the central column, radiating outward. There had to be a way to interface. Then I saw it. A small, almost invisible port, glowing faintly at the base of the descending platform, directly beneath the main projection source. It was designed to blend in, to be overlooked unless one knew precisely what they were looking for. Hidden in plain sight. I sprinted toward it, dodging a frantic operative who was trying to scramble away from a newly activated energy shield that had materialized, blocking a passage. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the culmination of everything. Reaching the edge of the platform, I risked a glance at the port. It was a universal data interface, cleverly disguised. I fumbled for the encrypted drive I always carried, the one given to me by Jessica, the one I had sworn to fill with the truth. My fingers trembled as I plugged it in. A surge of data hit the drive. The small indicator light on its casing went from red to a rapid, pulsating green. It was working. The entire multi-terabyte archive of this sprawling conspiracy was being downloaded, compressed, and secured. The process was agonizingly slow, yet impossibly fast, given the sheer volume of information. The operatives finally focused their attention back on me. "Stop him!" one of them roared, realizing what I was doing. They moved as a unit now, their initial terror momentarily replaced by a cold, desperate resolve. But the facility itself was still fighting them. Energy pulses flared, redirecting their paths, creating momentary barriers. It was a dance of chaos, and I was caught in the middle. "Almost there," I muttered, my eyes fixed on the drive. The percentage counter on its tiny screen crept upward. 70%, 80%, 90%. A shadow fell over me. Robert, recovered from the energy surge, was there, his face contorted with rage. He raised his rifle, aiming for my head. I instinctively ducked, the shot echoing off the cavern walls, sending a shower of sparks from the rock face behind me. Just as he was about to fire again, the drive's light turned solid green. "Done!" I shouted, ripping it free. With the drive clutched in my hand, I scrambled backward, away from Robert, toward a small, narrow fissure in the rock wall that I had noticed earlier. It looked like a natural fault line, but now, with the facility's defenses fully active, it began to glow faintly, revealing itself to be an emergency exit, perhaps another part of the original architect's failsafe. "He has it!" Sarah screamed, her voice shrill. I didn't look back. I plunged into the fissure, squeezing through the tight passage as the ground trembled violently once more. Behind me, I heard the sounds of a fierce struggle, the operatives now battling their own automated defenses, their cries of frustration and panic slowly fading as I moved deeper into the escape tunnel. I emerged into the cool night air, gasping, my lungs burning. Above me, the stars were a distant, indifferent canvas. But the world I had just left, the world beneath the earth, was anything but indifferent. I had activated the final piece, the ultimate truth. The encrypted drive felt heavy in my hand, a small, unassuming object that contained the power to dismantle titans, to rewrite history, to expose the unseen architects of our reality. The image of those ordinary men in the 1950s, smiling, oblivious to the monstrous web they were weaving, flashed in my mind. The final piece of evidence truly had been hidden in plain sight. Not just the data port, but the entire facility itself. It wasn't just a clandestine base. It was a grand, elaborate confession, a self-destruct mechanism for a conspiracy, waiting for someone to find the right key, to look beyond the obvious, and finally, to unveil the devastating truth that had been staring us in the face all along. Now, armed with that truth, it was time to make sure the rest of the world saw it too.